if you want to do good, it shouldn't cost more. That's a very silly logic that currently is defining many people's decisions.
Hi there, welcome to the Circumcenter, a series of stimulating dialogues on the circular economy. Today's topic is the circular economy within the architecture ecosystem. The building and construction industry is one of the most significant contributors to the climate crisis. These structures generate almost 40% of the annual global carbon dioxide emissions. Moreover, the construction ecosystem causes 23% of air pollution, 40% of drinking water pollution, and 50% of landfill wastes. But some visionary designers create a systemic change by utilizing circularity in architecture. Meet Jan Jongert. He's an architect and a designer on a mission to change architecture for the better. Jan is the co-founder of Superuse, a Dutch architecture firm specializing in reusing and repurposing waste materials. Let's hear it from Jan Jongert about the role of architects and designers in the circular economy. Hi Jan, welcome to the Circumcenter. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jan? What is in your center? What defines you as a person?
Yeah, well, I'm Jan Jongert. I'm one of the founders of Superuse, already working on circular design and architecture for 25 years. When I look at my personal drive, I'm always looking at the neglected parts. Where is value getting lost? What's the logic behind it, and why can't this work differently?
What is the most important thing to consider when you make a decision in your daily life?
The main change of view, I think, is when you think something is useless, what other function can it have? That's the one point. And from the other side, I need something to work before thinking, let's look at the web shop or go to shop to buy something new, to take a step back, and do I actually have something that could also have the same purpose? This is something that I've been doing for decades. This is something that also in my professional work I do on a larger scale.
When you think about your past, what inspirational event in your life made you who you are today?
Like the work I did as a student, of course, we needed to make models. And then for model making, I often went to a shop called Scrap, which sells industrial waste. They had really nice colored surfaces and letters. So, and it's a thin aluminum that you can easily cut and create nice models with. So this also was one of the revelations, I would say, is that at some point we thought, well, how we make the models, why don't we use the same materials instead of on a scale, but on one-to-one? Can't we have the same additional quality that we like from our miniature models in a real life environment? And I think for a more creative cultural development, I think that was a big inspiration to take the added quality from the used materials to something that you can experience in real life. Sorry, I can actually get a piece of material because we have it here in our. I can maybe do that later on when I go to the materials, and then I can actually.
You can do it now.
Okay. Actually, what derived from that way of working is that now in our office we have a material library. So I can show it over here. So that's this part. And I think the material I was just mentioning should be here as well. This is one thing. So this is more like printing rubber. So this is also from that we learned from. You can turn it into bags. And so that is very great material. Actually, the very nice project was that we were invited by the housing corporation that wanted us to move out of the houses that would demolish the houses. They actually later, 10 years later, asked us to design a fence for the scrap store that we went to because they are renting from that housing property. So we're also connecting former actors in our life.
What is the importance of coincidences in your life?
To actually allow coincidence to add quality to life and work, I think that's also one of my personal drivers. Creating circumstances that allow for unplanned interactions and actually understand what's happening and using them to create new steps in your development. I think that's something that makes the work and life very exciting and worth continuing.
We are now closing the first circle in which we focused on your background and personal life. Now we're moving into the second circle that is going to focus on your business and industry. In one of your interviews, you said that you had to overcome cultural barriers in front of against the idea of using waste in architecture. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are those barriers and how did you overcome them?
Next to having a more environmental ideal about how we want to build, it also was a aesthetical and cultural search for what is the aesthetics that suits the use of waste material, and can we create something that is not necessarily recognizable as waste material, but can we actually design it in such a way that it becomes architecture and has its own expression while being built with secondary materials. We wanted to prove that you could create a very high aesthetic quality architecture with those materials. And I thought it would be important to actually change the idea of aesthetics before the other industries are picking up. Still, I think we somehow managed by creating a different view on the waste materials. I think this helped, at least in the Netherlands, to make this circular construction something that is now accepted by construction culture as well. So larger construction companies, they all have their experiments with these kind of projects, some more visible, some less, but I think that that's what worked. And I hope still this is radiating to other countries as well. But this is also something why strategy to start Superuse in China in 2016, because the scale and the impact of our work in the Netherlands is rather limited, while in China, with much less waste processes being regulated, etc., this way of working has a much bigger impact and for much bigger flows of materials. It's really very nice is that with this, we also create a cultural exchange between the countries, and finding that 400 years ago in the Netherlands, we were really clever in designing our windmills, for instance, and that in China in the same period, also agriculture had a very intelligent approach, which all narrowed down to very target-oriented, one-dimensional, one product production lines or architecture. It's important that richness of design and the multidimensionality and the layeredness of working with today's technology and innovations, we can actually try to bring that back again.
You say one of the problems with architecture was the lack of transparency. In that sense, what is the responsibility of the architect when making design decisions?
Yeah, that's it's interesting to talk about responsibility. My idea about any professional person would be that you're responsible for everything that is actually connected to what you're doing. So every design decision you're taking has its consequences in what is being built, how people live, but also what's being produced in order to create that space. Whatever is not helping to allow me to have this responsibility, that's something that you need to add in the process. That's also, for instance, why at some point we came up with the idea of a dynamic, definite design. Actually allow the process to include new insights, while traditionally you have your definite design stage and then more or less your design is finished. The architect can just agree or disagree with what's going on and have some measures on it. But with our dynamic contract, we actually agree with the contractor and the client that whenever we can improve the design during the construction phase or the preliminary construction phase, we can sit together and make these common decisions still. So we implement in here design, tell the producer that you like to, that you agree with their way of production. So it cannot separate that responsibility from your design role. It influences everything.
Is there a way to implement accountability on development, design, and production decisions?
Well, we see this now developing in the Netherlands. We have, by law, architects are now required, at least with new constructions, to hand in material accountability sheets. So you need to make a calculation about the environmental impact of your materials. So we see some developments, but I think it's going in a better direction. At least you're required now to be accountable for the design you're making. So in that way, some improvement is being made, but still, I think it's more something that at this moment is something that's done at the end of the process, and then you're trying to reduce the impact so it gets below the admitted limit. Instead of that, something at the start of the process of design where you start with thinking, okay, how can I minimize any impact or even give a positive impact from the start.
Can you tell us about the Blue City, what it is, and how did you do this project?
We kind of got in contact with the concept called Blue Economy, which was developed by Gunter. We felt that somehow this idea about how to do business in an environmental positive way suited very much the ideas that we had developed with Superuse. So we came in contact with companies that also wanted to develop this way. Interesting is that what was clearly formulated in this Blue Economy concept is that it's never about designing or producing just one product, but the whole chain of product and all the processes that result in this product also need to be turned into services or have positive outcome. And some of them were based in a tropical swimming paradise that was derelict for some years. And together with them, we started developing a concept if we could transform that building into the hub for the circular, or actually the Blue Economy in Rotterdam. And luckily we've also found an investor that agreed to buy the building with us and allow us to develop this in a very experimental and great way, where actually the whole concept that we had to grow a city, we could experiment with within one building.
This concludes our second circle, and now we're moving into the third circle, in which we're going to focus on the future. What is the most important decision the building ecosystem needs to make today to create a circular future?
Well, if you look at the industry itself, I think start looking differently at their production and sources that they start to produce with. So really like the Blue Economy to not just have one type of product, one type of process where a lot of wastes are part of the final product you want to make, but actually see it as something that is an integrated process and where every part of it has to have a benefit. I think that way of thinking is something that's very much lacking in today's education and professional and especially in business development. But if you look at really the biggest systemic boundary to support this way of thinking, it's more a financial one. I said, actually in the past 150 years, you see that the governments have started to increase the taxes on labor and don't actually have a large taxes on the resources, and this makes decision maker decide to minimize the amount of labor and maximize the amount of cheap resources, and the waste is not taxed at all. So that's something that very much influences our decisions, and so that's why we joined a movement called X-Tax that is trying to create the shift from taxing labor to taxing the resources. And this, I think, it will be the major shift that needs to be made. So on the one hand, companies, of course, they need to change their way of working and their business models. The governments need to change their business model as well. If you want to do good, it shouldn't cost more. That's a very silly logic that currently is defining many people's decisions. It should be possible in the end also to change the tax system, because in the end we see it as something that is necessary for really sustainable transition in the future.
Thank you so much for your time, Jan.
Thank you. Very nice talk.
Thank you for watching. We hope this conversation inspired you to start your circularity journey today. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell button not to miss the future dialogues with passionate leaders in the circular economy. If you enjoyed this conversation, you could listen to the whole interview on Spotify or Apple Podcasts from the link below. See you at the next Circumcenter episode, discovering the center of your decisions.